So let's begin by reading the crucifixion of Jesus. So Matthew chapter 27, verses 32 through 44. As they were marching out, they came upon a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. This man was they compelled to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink, mingled with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there. And over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then two robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, he saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him. For he said, "I am the Son of God." And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. We had discussed Simon of Cyrene. We had discussed the drink, and that's actually as far as we got. We spent most of the time reading the parallel accounts in the other synoptics and in John, and then reading the 2 Psalms and from the Book of Wisdom. So we discussed
the crossbeam with Simon.
Right, we discussed the crossbeam. We discussed Simon's encryption, or what is it called?
Subscription.
Right. Conscription, right.
Yeah. Okay.
And we discussed the drink being offered to Jesus and the reasons for his not taking it. And so we get to the crucifixion, which Matthew spends a parenthetical on, and when they had crucified him. So an agonizing punishment and death, and Matthew just glosses it over, which in a lot of ways contrasts with sort of later Christian treatment, and particularly Christian treatment from the Middle Ages on, which sort of focuses on the agony of the cross. But for Matthew isn't very interested in the agony of the cross. Can anyone think of why?
Maybe because he was there.
Because what?
He wasn't there. So he didn't really want to elaborate on something that he had heard from somebody else.
Possibly, but there are probably other reasons.
Maybe he just he couldn't go through it. He couldn't do it, just to give all the pain and suffering that our Lord had. I don't know.
Possibly.
I think he was interested in the parts that fulfilled the prophecies, because he then talked in detail about the casting lots for the clothes, and the robbers crucified with him, and those were all in the prophecies.
Right. So his interest is theological. rather than in some sense practical. So, anyone who gets crucified is going to die an agonizing death, but in some sense, not to be callous, but so what? Anyone crucified dies an agonizing death. So what makes Jesus' death different than the robbers next to him?
He didn't complain.
Yeah, no, but that's not really, the not complaining is something that Matthew stressed earlier. So, in some sense, he's unlikely to stress it now since it was a major theme much earlier. He doesn't whatever a broken reed and doesn't quench a whatever flame.
I think probably the main difference is that he's the Christ and they aren't. He's the Son of God and
Right.
they aren't. And so he wants to focus on that part of what's going on.
So the important thing is that since he's the Son of God, the suffering may be the same, so that becomes irrelevant. And the question becomes the meaning of the cross. And nailing the Son of God to a cross has a different meaning than nailing a criminal to the cross, or even an innocently accused person to the cross. That doesn't accomplish the same thing. Those are just deaths that end in suffering. And then the second thing that you pointed out, Mary, is that he wants to show that this fulfills Scripture. So we started to discuss this last week, but so we have somebody who's nailed to a tree, right? Somebody who's nailed to a tree is cursed. Cursed is he who hangs from a tree. So how can it be that the Messiah and the Son of God is cursed and hanging from a tree? So that requires, and that's in fact is a major stumbling block. It was a major stumbling block in Judaism for Jewish Christians. It became not a stumbling block, but for non-Christian Jews, it was definitely a stumbling block. Here we have an apostate who's crucified. So how can you possibly elevate him to be the Son of God? So the first thing when they had crucified him, his first post-crucifixion detail is they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Does that sound familiar?
We read that
Uh-huh.
last week.
Let's take a quick look just at that verse.
That was Psalm 69, was it?
Psalm 22,
Oh,
verse 18. Starting at verse 16. Yes, dogs are round about me. A company of evildoers encircle me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So they divide my garments, and for my clothing they cast lots. So the crucifixion becomes an enactment of the 22nd Psalm. The condemned person's clothes, incidentally, become the property of the executioners. That's, a little something extra to reward them. Then then they sat down and kept watch over him there. So we have a contrast between the sitting and Jesus who was raised high in agony on the cross. That also they sat down and kept watch over him there is significant, because Matthew, from here through the beginning of chapter 28, emphasizes that Jesus was always being watched. So the women were watching, there was the guard watching, there were soldiers watching. So Jesus was constantly being watched. Then in verse 39, and those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads. That also is from Psalm 22. It's from Psalm 22, verse 7, starting at 6. But I am a worm and no man, scorned by men and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me, they wag their heads. They wag their heads. He committed his cause to the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. This is Jesus, King of the Jews, in verse 37. So using a board was a common practice in a crucifixion. The idea is that you can see the charge for which somebody is being marched off to be crucified, and it serves as one additional deterrent. So you hopefully get the message that if you do whatever it is that the person about to be crucified has done, you might end up being the next person on the cross. And so the board shows the folly of challenging Roman power. So the charge here, the charge is specifically Roman, right? King of the Jews. So the problem is that Jesus claims to be king, but there is no king but Caesar. And so in some sense, into a single charge, they've managed to both the Roman charge manages to both express anti-Semitism, he's the king of the Jews, and rebellion against Caesar because he's a king. But the irony, obviously, is that he is the king of the Jews. And the additional irony is that the guards are going to be among the first to come to believe in Jesus. How about crucified? Then two robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left.
Mhm. We're back in Matthew?
Yeah,
Okay.
verse 38.
And it didn't tell you which one was the good one, which one was mocking him.
Well, in Matthew, they're both mocking him.
It says both of them are, yeah.
Yeah. There are three crosses, right? Who is the central cross for?
Jesus.
Jesus, who might it have been for?
Barabbas.
Right.
Oh, really?
So remember, Barabbas means son of the Father. And the original most of the original manuscripts give him a first name, which is Jesus. So Jesus, he's Jesus, son of the Father. Barabbas, Abba, Father. So that's his name.
Son of the Father.
Jesus, son of the Father. But that's not his identity. Jesus is son of the Father, but his father's name is not Abba. I mean, it is Abba, but not in the natural world.
Hmm. But his said, Jesus, King of the Jews, right?
Right, but the sign is given to him. It's one of the additional things the sign is actually usually put around the neck. So
Oh,
as you're
okay.
carrying the cross, you have the sign. So the sign is made for the particular prisoner, but clearly the Romans were planning to crucify Barabbas. Pilate had wanted to crucify Barabbas. Barabbas was a social bandit, which poses a distinct threat to commerce and to law and order in the empire, which is highly undesirable and erodes tax money and creates instability and everything else. And so that sort of irony that Barabbas is the son of the Father, is named the Son of the Father. The cross is reserved for one who is the Son of the Father, but it ends up being occupied by the one who is truly the Son of the Father, rather than just named Son of the Father. Is that clear? The general consensus, the general consensus is that Jesus Barabbas is the most original version of Matthew's gospel, but it's not been introduced into the actual translations just because of considerations of tradition, very much like in John's gospel, the Jesus thwarting the woman who committed adultery from being stoned remains left in John's gospel, even though it clearly is a scribal addition that comes much later. So it's not found in any of the original manuscripts. So a major theme throughout this whole section, throughout the Passion, is that there's an enormous amount of irony. Matthew is very, everything is ironic. Everything has a meaning other than the one the participants think. And often that meaning is diametrically opposed to their intentions and to appearances. So they think that they're getting rid of the scribes and the Pharisees, not Pharisees, the chief priests and the elders think that they're getting rid of an apostate, a heretic, someone who is undermining the Mosaic law, and that they'll, sacrifice this guy in order to preserve the faith. But in fact, they destroy the faith. I mean, Judaism has survived, but Temple Judaism is dead. And I mean, although, there are hopes to revive it, including from some of our large numbers of our separated brethren, it is dead. It died both with the crucifixion, the resurrection, and with the destruction of the temple. So there are other ironies possibly here. Can anyone see what they might be? One on his right, one on his left.
This remind me of the passage of the mother that was asking for her sons to have a place on one on his right and one on his left.
Right.
And he said wait, are you going to be able to drink the cup that I will drink? And they're like,
right.
Yeah.
Exactly, right. Right, so that's an irony. So the two bandits are occupying precisely the place that James and John had wanted to occupy, but they're nowhere to be seen. And instead, seated at his right and at his left are two bandits.
Very good, Thais.
And there's also a continuation with the mockery of the Roman soldiers. Remember, they were mocking Jesus as king. So now, as the fake king, he has two bandits as his attendants. And so that in turn reflects his tendency to associate with sinners, which, is one of the things that very
He was
much
accused of.
upset everybody. The mockery. Notice that there's a difference in the mockery between the Romans and the Jews. The charge is, this is Jesus, King of the Jews. And in the mocking of Jesus, the focus is on Jesus as false king. But the mocking from the Jews is based on religious considerations. His claim to be God's son, his claim about rebuilding the temple in 3 days, and not at all, they're very different forms of mockery. And so he's mocked by the Sanhedrin, by passers-by, and by criminals, the two people on his side. So it's really a symbolic representation of Jesus' rejection by his own people.
Mhm.
So it also fulfills Psalm 69, verse 9. So let's take a look at Psalm 69. Let's read verses 9 through 12. For zeal for your house has consumed me, and the insults of those who insult you have fallen on me. When I humbled my soul with fasting, it became my reproach. When I made sackcloth my clothing, I became a byword for them. I am the talk of those who sit in the gate, and the drunkards make songs about me. So in the insults of those who insult you have fallen on me. You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. So they resurrect a charge of the Sanhedrin, right, from which we saw earlier in chapter 26, which was, so remember the Sanhedrin was looking for trumped up charges. So the point is that it points to, which is precisely the issue that that Matthew is trying to address here, that they're pointing to the ludicrousness of some guy hanging on the cross being anything other than some criminal or apostate hanging on the cross. That just makes no sense. So the fact that he's on the cross intrinsically reveals the ludicrousness of his claims. And so they call on him to save himself. Does anyone get the paradox?
I don't know if it's the paradox, but I do know that throughout, people were trying to get him to perform miracles as justification for who he was. And he had said, even if I do, they will not believe me.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so they're wanting him to do it again, but even if he did, they wouldn't believe him.
Right, right. The all of those statements about come down and save yourself, and later, um, he is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him.
they've
Even if
been-
he does come down from the cross, they're not going to believe in him. That's not. They're not. They're not being sincere or honest, because they know that it's not going to happen, because they
Yeah.
know that it's ludicrous that some guy hanging on a cross is certainly not the Son of God. So what don't they grasp here?
For one thing, who he really is.
Right? And what else?
And that the signs that are up truly say what he is. I mean, he's the king of the Jews. He is the Son of God. He is all of the things that they don't believe.
Mhm,
Even the King of the Gentiles.
mhm.
Mhm.
So what about saving oneself?
He's actually saving us.
How do you save your life?
Through Christ.
So he is saving us. I mean, he's saving us.
He's
not-
saving us instead of himself.
He's
Right,
up
he's saving
himself.
us instead of himself. And more generally, how does one save one's life?
by not hanging in the first place.
That's good. Let's take a look at chapter 16, verse 24
Of Matthew,
of Matthew. I'm sorry, yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah, if you save your life, you lose it. If you lose your life, you save it.
Right, exactly. So this is right after Peter rebukes Jesus for saying that he's going to go to the cross. And in verse 24, then Jesus told his disciples, if any man would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That's really critically important, because Jesus is talking not only about his own death, that he's going to die for others, but he's calling his disciples to be a people of sacrifice. And, in contemporary Christianity, we've really lost that element of the call to be a people of sacrifice. We imagine that something is about our rights. So, I don't have to wear a mask because that impinges on my liberties. We're not called to be
That's if we
concerned.
put political concerns above Christ or God.
Yeah, although, they're not completely political. I mean, what it really is, it can be political, and it is political, but it also, sort of need not be political. But it's founded on, this sort of selfishness and egotism, that something is about me, that what I want is ultimately very important, and that what's good for me trumps everything else.
Mm.
So it's egotism, it's selfishness, and when Christians do it, it's casting God in the role of servant. But we're called to be a people of sacrifice. We're called to lay down, to carry our cross. We're called to focus on God above all, and not on what we want. And so that's a really critical thing. It's not only, Jesus who died on the cross for our sins, but ourselves also, who should be sacrificing ourselves for others and for the good of humanity and for the expansion of the kingdom of God.
Ron, let me ask you something. People at that time believed in like when you die, what happened when you die, what they believed like happened when they died. Because there are like some inscriptions that say like, that you're gonna go back with the fathers, with Abraham, with Isaac, with like, with Jacob. And what did they believe happened when they died?
Well, the pre-Pharisaic belief, or those who didn't believe in resurrection, believed basically that you died and sort of were in this sort of suspended state in Sheol, which in the later version becomes hell. But it's simply a suspended state where those who die go. So everybody who dies is kind of, their souls are simply, forever dormant in this place. So
they didn't believe in resurrection or heaven or any of that.
No.
Okay.
No. So the belief in resurrection and the belief in heaven comes later. It sort of grows within Judaism. It becomes sort of encapsulated in the theology of the Pharisees. And so they believe that there's a judgment and that there is a heaven that one goes to. And then the Christian addition to that, which often we've missed somehow in the last millennia or so of church history, is that the goal, what we're striving for ultimately, is not heaven. What we're striving for ultimately is the new heaven and the new earth. And in the new heaven and the new earth, that's where, in heaven, we're simply, disembodied spirits. We have no bodies.
Mm-hmm.
In the new heaven and the new earth, we have resurrected bodies. And in the new heaven and the new earth, all things are restored. And God is at the center of all things. So that, sort of basic eschatology, that the second coming ushers in the new heaven and the new earth, is really also critically important. We've become, sort of fixated on getting to heaven and heaven as the goal, and it's not. And Pope Benedict talks about, sort of the damage that view has done, because we've maximized our understanding of the theology of salvation, which is, what that is. The saved, those who are found worthy, will go to heaven. And we've minimized our understanding of the theology of creation, which is that all creation will be restored. So, sort of always very important to focus on that. And also going back to, the original thing here, also really very important to focus on, that we're called to be a people of sacrifice, and those who sacrifice their lives. And here Jesus doesn't mean we literally go and die, although the martyrs obviously did and were living sacrifices. But we're called to remember that it's not about us. we're to subordinate our desires and our interests and our will to the will of God. It's God that matters. When we think otherwise, then we end up really distorting the faith. So we're called to be a living sacrifice. And so that's also the central meaning of the Eucharist. We're called to, we ourselves are the sacrifice in the Eucharist. We're called to join our sacrifice of ourselves with the sacrifice of Christ, so that they're represented now with us as participants before the Father. If anyone wants to take the class on mystagogy when I teach it starting in January, we'll study really an elaborate version of that in the work of Saint Ambrose. And although he doesn't use the term, his understanding of the meaning of anamnesis, which we talked about when we were discussing the Last Supper and the consecration verses. One last thing on verse 40.
Yeah. Let God deliver. Oh, okay. Yeah. Come down from the cross.
If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. Does that sound familiar? If you are the Son of God?
Did you say come down to the cross?
If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross.
So where have we heard if you are the Son of God before?
Where?
When Jesus was being tempted by Satan.
Yeah, exactly. In chapter 4, verse 3. And the tempter came to him and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. So they're playing the role of Satan. So that's heavy. They think that they're, the righteous and the religious. They presume to know the ways of God. And they're playing the role of Satan.
Well, I mean, after all, even Matthew was criticized and told, get behind me, Satan.
Peter.
Peter. Not
Right.
Matthew. Yeah, Peter. So, I mean, he made the mistake too. Which, when I first heard it, shocked me. It was like, what? He's offering to die for him.
Right. But there's also a difference. Peter was doing it out of compassion and love for Jesus and a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
And this is done cynically, very much like Satan says,
that's
command
true.
these stones to be bread, thrust yourself down from the heights of the temple so the angels can minister to you, knowing full well that as man, Jesus will be crushed when he lands. So it's cynical. It's not born out of love. It's not born, and just like Mary said, if he actually came down, they wouldn't believe it anyway.
Yeah.
So, it's done dishonestly. And so, Peter in seeing the cross as a stumbling block and in trying to impede Jesus was temporarily playing the role of Satan, and hence Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. But here, these people are enacting the role of Satan.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
There's a difference, and they're committed to enacting the role of
Mhm.
Satan down to if he were the Son of God,
Mhm.
using the same phrase. So, so, so that's heavy, and also in some ways, sort of instructive. We want to always make sure that we're not accidentally playing the role of Satan.
And the scribes and elders were guilty of that too.
Yeah, yeah. So we can stop there.